Hi everyone, it's Todd. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be chatting about community, how I feel like I struggle to find where I belong in the disability community, why I feel that way, all the things. So let's get right on into it. First of all, my disability is so unique. For those of you who don't know literally anything about my disability, I was paralyzed from the neck down when I was 8 years old due to a neurological condition called acute flaccid myelitis, or AFM for short. And I recovered the ability to walk within 2 months of being in the hospital, but I only regained partial movement in my arms and hands. So can't move my left hand at all. I have very limited movement in my right hand. Like for example, I can't even do like a thumbs up. I can't like lift my pinky finger up, and I can't lift my arms up very high. So I have a very unusual disability. Like it's not that often that somebody would encounter someone like me who can walk, but I can't move very specific areas of my arms and hands. Like that is so unique, so unusual. And so I think because my disability is so unique, that's partly why I've struggled to find like where I fit in within the disability community. I was very lucky to find somewhat of a community early on in my disability journey. So as I said, everything happened to me when I was 8 years old. And then when I was 10, like that's kind of when I first started developing a little bit of a community. I met my best friend, Jen. She's still my bestie to this day. She's like my older sister. She's 4 years older than me. So when we met, I was 10, she was 14. And we met because we had the same diagnosis. So actually at the time, I was diagnosed with transverse myelitis, or TM for short, and so was Jen. So our moms had actually chatted on social media, and we determined that we were gonna all be in Baltimore at the same time for treatments at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So we were like, we should meet up. So we all met up, and Jen and I instantly clicked, like became best friends right away. So I developed a community within Jen very quickly. Like just the two of us had our own little community, I guess. Like usually you have more people in a community than two people, but just having Jen and she having me was so helpful for us. And we got to see each other a lot when we were kids because we attended these summer camps that were for families who were affected by transverse myelitis. I wasn't re-diagnosed with AFM until 2018, so we thought I had TM back then, but AFM and TM are grouped in with some disorders that are all pretty similar to each other. So there's this one organization that does programming for TM, AFM, and some other conditions. So Jen and I attended this camp, and we really loved having the opportunity to see each other at summer camp, but we did get to meet other families and other kids and adults who had TM. And so Jen also at the time was able to walk just as well as I am, and her arms and hands were partially paralyzed similarly to mine. She did unfortunately have a setback a while ago now, like years ago, that resulted in her now using a wheelchair most of the time. But at the time, she was walking everywhere. So Jen and I have talked about this a lot. We talked about it at the time and in the years since. We were like the only two kids with TM, at least we thought I had TM back then, who were walking without trouble at camp. And so we were compared to the other kids a lot by those kids' parents and by the camp counselors. And we always talk about this one moment where we distinctly remember a camp counselor was chatting with us, and she said, "But you two have made such a great recovery, right?" And she was clearly saying that because she'd observed that a lot of the other kids were wheelchair users and Jen and I were not. And we were like, yeah, like we did regain the ability to walk, but we still have a lot of paralysis in our arms and hands, and it makes our lives a lot more difficult. Like it sort of felt like this comparison game that Jen and I were victim to at the hands of the other parents and some of the counselors, was them implying that we like weren't as disabled as the other kids, which is never a helpful comparison to make. Being disabled is hard no matter what disability you have, and like obviously some disabilities are more challenging than others, but there really is no need to point that out most of the time. It's not relevant. It can really just create a toxic environment. And so I started feeling like my disability was pretty invisible back then. I felt like nobody really saw the struggles that I endured day to day, except for me, and like Jen knew and my family knew, but it felt like people discounted my hardships I experienced on my day-to-day, and that did not feel good at all. So early on, I kind of started feeling like, oh, I guess my disability is invisible. Like people aren't gonna look at me and see me as disabled. And I didn't necessarily realize that that might cause me to have like a slight identity crisis. But later on in my life, I definitely went through an identity crisis, and I'm still sort of going through that. We're gonna get into that. But all of that to say, the community around transverse myelitis and acute flaccid myelitis is very parent dominated. And that is why, like, when people ask me if I found a community, I always say, like, yes, I absolutely have, but I don't find community within the TM or the AFM community because it's parents. And part of the reason for that is that a lot of people who get AFM, like they get it when they're a baby or they're 2 years old. I got it at 8 years old, but I was like one of the first cases of AFM. And obviously we're all gonna grow up and get older, but I'm still like one of the oldest ones. And so I don't really have like a community of people with AFM. TM, there are more adults, but I was re-diagnosed with AFM in 2018, and I really didn't identify very well with people with TM back then because most of them are wheelchair users, and I always felt compared to them, and like people thought that they were like more disabled than me. So I never identify with a community of people in the TM or AFM community at all. Like that is not where I found my community. It's so frustrating how parent focused it is. And that's why I do like to share my experience with AFM, and I will freely discuss my diagnosis and my experience having AFM on my social media and in speaking engagements and such, but I haven't found like an AFM community that I bond with necessarily. So I don't have a community in the AFM world. Do I have a community in another disability subcategory? Well, I felt like my disability was invisible for the longest time, really until I went to college, and I took a disability studies course while I was there. It like changed my life. It was so amazing. My favorite course I've ever taken. And in that class, we talked a lot about visibility and invisibility and what makes a disability invisible. And there's a lot of nuance to that. And that got me thinking, okay, like, no, my disability is not invisible. And so I started proudly saying that my disability was visible and apparent because I felt like I was centering other people's perspective of me if I said that my disability was invisible, because it's like that's how they see me. But I know myself best, and I know my disability brings me struggles every day that I see and deal with. And I'd asked my disability studies professor to write a letter of recommendation for me for something I was applying to. And in that letter of recommendation, she referred to me as somebody with a limb difference. And this was such a big moment for me because I did not tell her to refer to me that way. She chose to refer to me that way herself. That's how she saw me, as a student that she knows very well. And this was actually such a validating moment for me because I'd had experience applying for a retreat that I'd seen for young girls who were amputees or who had limb differences and not accept me. I was pretty certain that it was because they didn't see me as somebody with a limb difference. Like, I'm obviously not an amputee. I never would claim that I'm an amputee because I am just objectively, factually not an amputee. But I feel like there's a little more nuance to the term limb difference that I don't see discussed ever. So it was very telling to me that I was not accepted to attend this retreat for young girls who are amputees or limb differences. And it really made me feel like I did not belong in that group, and like that group didn't see me as somebody who belongs in that group, even though as long as I've had my disability, I've very much related to people who have lost an arm like completely, or part of their arm or part of their hand or some fingers, because even though my limb is there are so many similarities between me and a lot of people with upper limb differences. So it really felt invalidating to not be accepted for the retreat, because to me that was essentially being told that I didn't belong there, even though I know I can relate to that group and I may even be part of that group. I think that's a subjective thing. So I will sometimes refer to myself as someone with a limb difference, but I feel like people may not accept me for doing that. It seems controversial to me, like every time I do it. Like I feel like maybe I shouldn't be referring to myself as somebody with a limb difference because like I don't fully know. But then I'm like, but this identity feels right to me. Like I feel like I have a limb difference, just not in like the most conventional way that people think of limb difference. And I've discussed my feelings about the limb difference identity and myself with some of my friends who are upper limb amputees or who have upper limb differences, and they see it as totally fine for me to identify that way, and they've told me that it's definitely nuanced and kind of controversial, and they know that some people might have differing opinions on that, like who is like accepted as being being limb different. So it's definitely a topic worth discussing and something that I'm not the only one who's thought about for sure. So because not everyone may accept me identifying as having a limb difference, I'm left thinking, where do I fit in? Like, I don't really fit in the TM community because I was re-diagnosed with AFM. My TM diagnosis was apparently incorrect, and most people with TM are wheelchair users, so I don't fit in there. I don't quite fit in with the AFM community because it's dominated by parents. So there's not really many people for me to talk to in that community. I don't fit into a wheelchair user community because I used a wheelchair for 2 months of my life. I'm not somebody who uses any mobility aids. I don't really fit into the limb different community because you look at me and these are not really the types of limbs people think of when they think of somebody having a limb difference. So this is why I've built a disability community for myself, but this community is built up of disabled people with all different kinds of disabilities, like blind people, deaf people, people who use wheelchairs, people who use canes, people who use walkers, people with non-apparent disabilities. Like, I am friends with so many different disabled people who have all different disabilities, and this has worked out amazingly for me. I love having this really broad community. In fact, my friend who I met in college, she's one of my besties, she's deaf. She actually recently got a cochlear implant. We were talking a lot about deaf culture recently and ASL. She was born with her hearing loss. She speaks and she has her cochlear implant, and she told me that when people think of deaf people, they think of people signing, like deaf people communicating with sign language. And it's frustrating for her because she's deaf and she doesn't sign, yet that's like the picture that people have in their mind if they think of a deaf person. So she's not included in that like stereotype. And as a result of that, it can make it difficult for her to be accommodated with her disability because she doesn't need a sign language interpreter. Like, that would not be helpful for her at all. What would be more helpful for her is live captioning. But a lot of the time at events, they're more likely to have a sign language interpreter versus live captioning. Or if they have a sign language interpreter and live captioning, there can be mistakes with the live captioning, like there might be typos, there might be internet issues, and it's just not great. And so that's frustrating for her. Like, people think of deaf people and they think of ASL. So when we were talking about this recently, I was like, oh my gosh, so ASL is to you as wheelchair accessibility is to me. And what I meant by saying that was like, she is deaf and people think of deaf people, they think of ASL. They think that's what's needed for accommodations. For me, I'm paralyzed. When they think of a paralyzed person, they think of wheelchair accessibility. That's what people think I would need to be accommodated. And that is not true for either of us. She doesn't need ASL interpreting and I don't need wheelchair accessibility. Obviously, some things with wheelchair accessibility benefit me, like ramps and elevators, but I wouldn't need a shower chair, for example. I would need some way for me to put my elbow on a platform and reach my hair in the shower. That's what I would need. So all of that being said, I'm very thankful for the disability community that I've built because I've worked very hard to build it. And I love having friends in so many different cities, and being able to meet people in person for the first time is always really fun. And I know so many cool people because of my disability, and having a disability community that's built up people with all different types of disabilities has helped me learn that I do not need to box myself in to like my diagnosis or my type of disability to find community and to bond with other disabled people. Like, literally just having disability in common with somebody else is enough for me to bond with them. Like, last week when I was at an event in DC, I got to meet Molly Burke in person. We'd followed each other on social media for a long time and it was so much fun meeting her in person. She's blind. I don't know what it's like to be blind. She doesn't know what it's like to be paralyzed like I am, but we were bonding over so many shared experiences with disability. So really just having that in common is enough to create like a beautiful friendship, and it's very special. I am very interested in hearing y'all's thoughts on this discussion. Identity is very complex and it's kind of always evolving. Like, it's not necessarily going to be static. So I may feel differently about my identity in a few years, and that's okay. So always interesting to be learning more about myself in that way, honestly. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video and found this interesting and enlightening. If you did, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I've been posting YouTube videos every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern, so I hope to see you all at my next video. Bye, everyone.